So in this video, I'm going to start with about a 4 or 5 minute overview of a real world case study where there was a model shoot. Everything's covered, like how to pick the location, the time of day to go shoot, the apps you can use for it, where to place the model, natural light versus external flash shooting, how the depth of field changes radically with only a focal length change. And then I'm going to show you some specific Adobe Camera RAW sync settings of how you can sync your settings across multiple images, whether it's 2 or 2000. And there's 2 or 3 easy ways to do that. And I'm actually going to show you that over, I think, about 3 different case studies of model shoots. And all of these models were professional paid models. But anyway, and then I'm going to show you color grading. I'm going to cover the presets, and then I'm going to cover how you make snapshots. So this would be a kind of a jam-packed but eclectic finalizing for production workflows to some creative ideas. And this is an app on my iPad where I was trying to locate where the sun's direction would be for a location that I knew I was going to drive to. So I knew if I was coming in here, and this is behind a bunch of mall buildings, and it's going to give me, like, at 11:30 the sun's coming this way. In the evening towards sunset it's coming from behind. And if I want to shoot not towards these buildings, but if I want to shoot towards these trees that are very far off, giving me a great shallow depth of field, well, obviously I can't shoot very late in the day because all the light's going to be coming back this way. My subject's going to be strongly backlit. And if I shoot it too early in the morning, the sun is going to be hitting the model's face, and I won't have any shadows to create it, to protect it. But if I shoot somewhere in the late morning, early afternoon, it's going to give me this shadow you see right here. So this is the overall scene behind the mall. So as soon as I get there, I typically shoot a straight flat shot. Like, okay, this is generally what I want. The model standing in front of the very, very distant trees. So this was shot at 2.8 with a 95mm focal length. I always like to see the full scene. It looks a little overexposed, so I take the next shot, 8,000th at 2.8. I want to find what the ambient exposure is going to be before I start figuring out what kind of reflectors or flashes I need to manipulate the scene. So then I open back up and I throw up a reflector. It's such a big reflector. Obviously, I need a lot of sandbags, otherwise it's going to blow down on my model and possibly hurt her. So we went through a huge variety of poses. Like, this is at 153mm, still at 2.8, but notice how that focal length is making that blurry background blurrier. Because notice the difference. This also is at 2.8, and you see how I'm not walking closer to the subject, which would also make the background blurrier at f2.8. This is strictly focal length compression that makes 2.8 shot at 70mm, but if I double it to shoot at 153mm, that same f2.8 is going to make that background even blurrier. And the further away it is from the model, the blurrier it will be. I'm not digging it, right? I'm trying to change the positioning of myself just to get different parts of the background, and I'm finding it distracting. I really want a lot of dark areas in the background. So then I'm thinking, with the posing, she doesn't have a lot of freedom, right? Now I've got hot, bright light blowing out the highlight details in her nose. I mean, it's not blown out, but it's very distracting, right? And now I've got this crazy hot spot on top of her head, even though I've moved her to be in deep shadow. Like, now I've moved her into here, but was still letting her get hit by some of the sun. But then I decided, let's just go ahead and pull her right up against this wall, which is what I did with this image. I'm still using the gold reflector to provide a nice rim light fill that's very subtle from the background. And then I'm powering an off-camera external flash, and I'm letting this big white wall be a big softbox to illuminate this side of the model. So this is the shot with no external flash. And again, for natural light photographers, you've really got to embrace the idea that when you're only shooting natural light, the shots you're going to get are going to be very reactionary. Like, you're limited to what you can get just by hiding in the shadow and maybe adding a reflector. But as soon as you can wash it with some light, notice the clarity that you can get in the difference in the eyes. It just gives you a lot more exposure control in those shadow areas. And so here's the exposure that was nice and flat and uniform, because at this point I've decided, okay, I'm going to have to shift this to black and white, because at black and white, I can really push the contrast wherever I want. I can drop that background super dark, and I was going for more of a high fashion black and white while maintaining all of those details. I shot hundreds of images, but I'm going to select these, and I haven't done this with you before. I'm going to click Open in Camera RAW, and it's going to automatically reopen that film strip that I closed earlier. Because now I can say, what are the global things I want to look at with this image? Well, looking at it, I could say maybe the exposure's a little too bright. Maybe I can pull down my highlights a little, but I don't want to lose my shadows. And maybe I do want my vibrance up a touch, but again, I don't want to blow out those highlights. I'm going to pull those back down, pull this back down. Maybe my vibrance is too much. I'll pull that back. So it's just a tug of war, right? Trying to get it where I think it looks the most exciting. I'll come down and just apply a quick, kind of a heavy vignette. So what I wanted to show you is if you shift click on, I'm just going to actually do it on 3 images, and you right click, you can choose sync settings, and everything I just did, it automatically checks. I can check other stuff, but I'm just going to leave it okay. And do you see how it automatically updated both of these? So I'm gonna hit done just to get out of that. And look, those 3 images updated. I adjusted on this one, and then it applied them to both of these. That's such a huge deal. I mean, if you're shooting a couple session and you're staying in the same lighting in the same area of the park, or you're shooting the reception and the lighting is all the same in the reception, you can make some quick global edits to make your images really sing. Now, what about this image? I didn't apply those settings. Well, here's another neat thing you can do. You can click on this one image, or you can shift click and select 1,000 images in Bridge. You can right click and just go down to Develop Settings, Previous Conversion, which means apply whatever you just did in Camera RAW to right here. And since it was the last thing I just did, boom. And that again could have applied to 1,000 images. Okay, so here's a set of images. So I'm going to select this one and this one, open those 2 in Camera RAW, and we know what to do. We're going to go to we're already in the basic editing tab, toggle it open, choose the white balance tool, click on one of those gray swatches. Perfect. Maybe I want to pull in my blacks just a touch. It looks like I'm blowing out just the yellow channel, so I can just pull that highlight back just a little. So I would pull that down to, okay, look what I've done with the whites though. So I need to pull my whites back up. Remember, keep that around 242 in the RGB channels, looking up in the histogram. There we go. We're back in the ballpark where my whites aren't contaminated or muddy. I've cleared off the color cast. The black looks black. If I wanted to add just a quick vignette just to give it a little bit, I'm showing this to my client and we're quickly picking images. Well, I can then take that setting and say, hey, hold the shift key, select this, right click, and do sync settings. Hey, apply it to this image. Yep, all that stuff. Click done. See how it updated both of these. But let's say I have 2,000 of these images. So what would happen if I did other images and I'm coming back? I'm like, oh yeah, I want to sync all these settings. I can come to this image, right click, go to develop settings and say copy the settings applied to this image. And then I can click on the first image, and here I'm just scrolling down to the 8th image, but it could be the 8,000th image. So select it. It's going to select everything in between the first and last click. Then I right click and just say develop settings. Please paste settings. Boom. It's going to say, do you want to apply all these normal settings? These are the ones that don't require manual adjustments like geometry and cropping and healing and masking. I'm going to click OK. And it's going to sync all 8, but it could have been all 8,000. And it's letting me know it's done it at the top. So now here's the same model, different outfit, in different lighting conditions. So again, take your first shot in the lighting that you're going to be in, and that's a good way to quickly color calibrate the white balance. There we go. And you can make any other adjustments. I feel like the shadows are a little too dark, and I feel like the highlights are a little crisp, but I think something like that looks nice. I'm gonna click done, and then I'm gonna click the first one, the last one, click right. I'm gonna go down to develop settings, and I'm gonna do previous conversion because it was the last thing I did. That updated the white balance, a very subtle shift, but it updated all the way across. Now, what would happen with like these 3 images? Because it looks, well, actually these 4, it looks like these 4, the lighting shifted. It's like I've changed the lighting. I've eliminated the background light, which maybe was giving me some more reflected light. So maybe I would open those themselves back in Camera RAW and say, for these, and I'm going to select them all, they really should be just a little bit brighter in exposure, something like that. And maybe just a touch warmer, and click done. So see how I quickly adjusted the 3 that looked a little too dark because I shifted the lighting a little bit? This is how quickly you can simultaneously process multiple files across huge client folders or work folders. And think of this as like an overarching, it's going to need these basic things. That way I don't have to look at overexposed images. Because remember, like up here, if I were to right click and say, I don't want that setting, clear previous settings, it's going to get rid of it. Because basically what I'm saying is I don't want to look at my images where they're so overexposed, right? Because I mean, what do I say to do? So remember, I typically say exposed to the right because that's where the bulk of your bit depth tones are. So you expose to the right to retain all the information in your digital negative, but then you process and pull it back down to give a correct exposure. So oftentimes you have to do mass adjustments to all of your images just to make them look good while you're reviewing them yourself or with a client. So that way they look good as you're going through them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to this completed image that I've saved out as a JPEG, right? My working file is a .psd, but I exported it as a JPEG because I wanted to show you how you can take a JPEG over there to Adobe Camera RAW. Now it's saying, hey, did you realize you blew all this out? And again, if it's for print, that's not going to work. If it's for the web, it doesn't matter. But I can quickly salvage that highlight, right? I don't care about the dark areas blowing out here. And that's why you see the blue. I don't care about the clip shadow detail. I like this look. A couple things I haven't shown you that I want to show you. Color grading. So think about dual toning. Here we now have shadows, midtones, and highlights. So if I say, I want to make my shadows more blue, something like that, and I want to make my highlights more warm, something like this. That's a real quick duotoning, and you can make your midtones a little blue, a little warm. You kind of get to decide what look you want to go for, and then you have a general slider to drag the ratio balance in between them. And again, this is the color grading area that allows you to stylize these things. Now, if you don't like it, Alt or Option, click on Reset, and just take it back to the original. I'm going to resalvage those highlights. And now I'm going to go over to the presets, Portrait Edgy. See, I can scroll down and it's just going to apply all these different effects. Maybe I like the retro areas. Cinematic. You see what's happening. So again, this is how you can quickly apply some presets. You sort of have to play with them and figure out what each one does to figure out which ones you would typically go to. And then you can save them as your favorites. And then let's say I like this. And I'm going to come back up to this snapshot icon. And I'm going to say, click on this snapshot icon here. Make a snapshot. And I can name it whatever the preset was so I would remember it. And now I can go back to my presets and say, where was that kind of green one? Like that. Like I like the green one. Or it looks like my favorite is the CN16. I'll do that one. And then I'll go back and click on this snapshot icon here. Add another snapshot. So now I can toggle back and forth very quickly, like which one do I like? So I have some varieties. And again, if I save these as my favorites, see, I only have one favorite currently. That way I can just save my favorites here and I can actually create my own user presets. But anyway, I just wanted to quickly show you that part. I'm gonna click cancel. So how about some quick review questions? Just 4 of them. What happens to Camera RAW images when you edit them in Camera RAW? The Camera RAW file contains unprocessed picture data from your digital camera's image sensor. The Camera RAW files give photographers control over interpreting that image data rather than letting the camera make the adjustments and conversions in camera, where it bakes it in. When you edit the image in Camera RAW, it preserves all the original file data even after you've edited it in Camera RAW. You can always go back to the original. It always stays intact for future use. Now, what is the advantage of the Adobe Digital Negative file format? So DNG, the DNG file format contains raw image data from a digital camera as well as all the metadata that defines what the image data means. DNG is an industry-wide standard for Camera RAW image data. DNG can help photographers manage proprietary Camera RAW formats, and it provides a compatible archival format that includes edits. How can you apply the same settings to multiple images in Camera RAW? There are a lot of ways to do this. To apply the same settings to multiple images in Camera Raw, you can select the images in the film strip, click the film strip menu button and choose Sync Settings, and then select the settings that you want to apply and click OK. It's the most common way. If you're back in Bridge, you can select all the images that you didn't process if the last thing you just did was apply the ACR processing. And you could select those images, right click and choose under Develop Settings, Previous Conversion. Third way, if you're back in Bridge, you see some image you manipulated a minute ago or 2 days ago or 2 months ago, you can click on that image, right click, go down to Develop Settings, click Copy Settings, and then select all the images you want to apply those settings to, like assuming that all those images were shot in the same similar lighting locations, and just right click, Develop Settings, and then click Paste Settings. Those are the 3 ways you can simultaneously upgrade many images. How can you apply Camera Raw as a filter? To apply Camera Raw as a filter, you just choose Filter, Camera Raw Filter in Photoshop. Make the changes you want to make in Camera Raw and then click OK. Now, if you're doing this from inside Photoshop, if you start inside Photoshop, those Camera Raw settings are going to be baked in on that particular layer that you were on in Photoshop. If you want that constant editability, you just need to convert that layer into a smart object before you click on the Camera Raw. That way it will be a smart filter, allowing you to bounce back and forth forever. Hey, if you like this video and it helps, you can help me. Smack it, whack it, and crack-a-lack it. Take care. I like subscribers.
That's awesome! Whoa! Yes! God, I did. This is...
Hey, you stayed to the end. You know what that means? You're awesome. I'm talking about you. Now get out of here.